Hello and welcome to the Vault of Will. Today, I'm going to be coming back to the channel with a long-awaited thing of deck reviews. I've had a little bit of a hiatus because taking care of some stuff in personal life, got sick for a week and a half. That week and a half then turned into like 2 weeks, and then my fiance had surgery. Yeah, and in the process of that, like 3.5 weeks, apparently the other two didn't do anything. So, I've actually been deck brewing. I've been doing stuff on my own side, so I'm going to bring this, plus the Lucifer list that we've seen before, plus I think I have around 5 other lists I have been working on in the background, recording some gameplay and stuff, so I'll be able to crunch that all out probably the next 2 days, get a backlog going, and probably get reoccurring videos back up. But today we're just going to go with my standard Knights list. I was asked to do by Tom because he's a big fan of the Knights, and he wanted me to find a way to make it viable. It took a lot of lists, a lot of tries, a lot of color mashups, a lot of rulers, me generally trying every single combination I could, and this one I'm actually the happiest with. For ruler, I went back to the standard Arthur, because the runes I wanted to use for this rune deck were blue nature, and I couldn't really use any other ruler, and Loki wouldn't have felt as impactful. Start off, we're going to use Approaching the Truth. The one green will quick cast. This will allow us to look at the top 2 cards of our deck and set them up. We get to plan our first draw, and we also get to rig the top card of our deck, which can really help when going into other cards, much like when we're setting up for our Super Mobile Fortress Camelot, because this card will allow us to look at it, and if our Super Mega Fortress Camelot is there, send it straight to the bottom of the deck, so we don't draw it, so we can get it off Guinevere. This card also allows for I use Pictorial Scroll to be useful, to where we can set the top card as a resonator and bring it straight into play. Starting out with, now let's move on to I use Pictorial Scroll. Well, this card's in the deck because it ultimately lets us pretty much draw a card, but if that card happens to be a resonator or a machine with 3 or less, it's just going to straight up summon it for us. So a 2-drop that could summon a 3-drop, I like it, plus with how many resonators we have in the deck that it can ultimately target, I felt like it was pretty decent. Beyond the Threshold of Time, it's another card that draws, because the biggest round with Knights we were seeing in all of our reviews and everything we were doing. Not enough draw, not enough filter, not enough consistency. I really, as you can see with just these first 3 cards, have really been overhauling that and getting it to a point where it's better. This also allows for a little stone ramp into the deck, which is ultimately very beneficial and can help give you that edge. Next, we're going to use 4 Donut Drones, because Donut Drone's just amazing for the deck. I don't really think he needs an explanation. 3 Guinevere's is always helpful. She's a Wanderer Machine human, though I don't really use the race too much in this, unlike some of the other variants we made, which I can easily cover in the next video. Well, but pretty much here she's just going to be generating counters for us and bringing out our Super Mega Mobile Fortress Camelot. So that's really all she's here for. When she enters, she works good with Vivian to generate 3 counters onto Vivian, or put 2 counters onto herself. When your opponent's using bounce or removal effects, you can always use her secondary effect to destroy them and give her more counters, as well as build up your scrap and build more. So ultimately it can work pretty well there. Moving into a Keys' Call play, yeah, works pretty decently. It's quick cast and can cancel automatic abilities. Even though we're running green, we choose not to run Lorite in this deck, because we can just run Keys' Call. It does almost the same thing. We're favoring blue on our Mana Stone base, so this should be more prevalent, as well as this provides us a draw that Lorite does not. Plus, we don't really see activate abilities being too big of an issue. Currently in this current form, it's all automatics. Yes, Lorite can target automatics of additions and stones, where Keys' Call can only target resonators, but those are also negligible effects. Lancelot's of a 4 of. I think we've gone over Lancelot enough, even just in the most recent spoiler reviews we've been talking about him constantly. Yeah, he's probably one of the best blue cards we have, because he's a 3. He costs 7/7. Gonna put 1/1 counters on all his other machines. He has removal. Well, he has board removal. He's automatically a 4 for this deck. Merlin was one of the more controversial choices. It took me a long time to understand his proper value in the deck, other than me just wanting to label him as machine filler, like all the other machine filler. So, Merlin's greatest benefit isn't in his stats, it's in his awakening. To where he generally just does a really nice job of being a 5-drop, let me summon 7 worth of stats and into the board. You can summon him for 5, if his effect will give you a +2, thus allowing you to bring a Lancelot to the field from your deck with him. Ultimately allowing you to fix that issue of them not having enough search or anything to really keep going into late game when your hand gets lower, as well as helping with when they discard, allowing you to pick back up the pieces of what you were left with and get back in the game. Ruined Stories is interesting because it is going to utilize Darkness Will that otherwise we seem not to be able to produce, except that we do run Speaking Stone in the deck just so we can run the spell. Ruined Stories allows us to be able to use counter spells as well as removal spells and recovery spell. It's all 3 in 1. It makes up for a few of the other positions we're missing in the deck. One theme I tried to do with this deck was make sure every card in it had more than 1 use. This card has 3 of it that it occupies. His keys is called cancels effects, draws us a card. Guinevere produces counters but also summons Camelot. Approaching the Truth can rig our next draw as well as giving us a draw, or just let us throw other cards that we don't want to draw to the bottom. I use Pictorial Scroll as one of the only cards in this that doesn't serve that many multiple purposes, but it still does let us just do a 2-cost draw or summon a Resonator. So it's pretty good. Beyond is just going to draw us a card, give us a stone. I really tried to push that every card in this is providing multiple benefits. Up next is Ruin Submerged Beneath the Misty Springs, which I just added before this video and didn't realize that I had it at 4. It's actually going to be a 3 of in this deck, because when this enters the field, it's going to allow us to produce mist counters, which will give all of our machines barrier by removing 2 of them. And when you're using so many low-cost water resonators, like this deck does, or how many ways of quickly summoning them out with like a Merlin play, the giving them immunity to with barrier can help can allow you to build tall resonators, like throwing 12 counters on a Vivian and making sure they can't just bounce it back to your hand. 3 super mobile Fortress Camelots, because if you draw 1, you don't want to be slowed down by Guinevere not being able to play you 1. So you can always make sure you'll at least have 1 in deck, unless you get very unlucky with your draws. But it's also not bad to cast it out of hand late game. Up next, we do use 3 the Dragon Lord's Breath, just for a little extra draw there with our time off of our time stones. It also allows us to bounce resonators or bounce multiple resonators with secondary awakening. This card gives us some extra much needed removal that doesn't rely on our counterplay, but does also give more draw. Up next, we're going to be running 4 Vivian, the Mechanical Fairy. She's our main counter generation source, as well as allows us to tap down enemy resonators so we can't take any hits. Ultimately, this deck in and of itself is pretty solidly built for a little bit of control, but also it's a tempo combo deck, so it has to be built with enough cycle, enough draw, and ultimately I feel like I did that pretty well. This is probably one of the better Knights lists I've seen. We've actually been asking around in the group, we've been looking at Knights lists. Most people aren't going 2-color with this. Technically you could say I went 3. but I generally felt the green support that I was using from this is very minimal, but it's very necessary. Ruin Stories is allowing me to recover my resonators that die, yeah, as well as remove pesky ones with the banish effect, or just be used for a cancel spell when time needs it. Beyond the Threshold allows me Stone Ramp a little bit for a tempo deck and a combo kind of play style. Definitely does help, because you can fall behind or be limited by your stones. Approaching the Truth allows me to set up my draws as well as just play ahead a little bit. Because if I know the top 2 cards on my deck and I'm allowed to change their order, I also know my next turn. If I know my next turn while they're in their turn, I know if I want to spend resources from my hand to counter certain plays, because I know if I have an answer coming or not. So the benefits I'm getting out of playing with dual color green, even as minimal as I am, are very necessary and valuable for this deck. So moving on to the stone deck, we're running 2 Magic Stone of Dramaturgy. Yeah, ultimately allows us a little stone production here with the 1/1 counters and 2 Water Will. But mainly our main stones we're going to be running is the Magic Stone of Time. We're going to be running 4 of them. Ultimately, the Magic Stone of Dramaturgy I'm not finding very useful, because it's only machine resonators that were put into the field this turn. Ultimately, this is one of the only cards that can target Arthur when he's in his ruler form to give him more counters. So it has a little value there, but all my other resonators I'm probably not going to be tapping because they don't have swiftness to be buffing them that turn. No, or I'm wanting to hold more will to be able to cast my Keys' Call. So I'm generally wanted to demote this down until I get 2 of. The Magic Stone of Time also produces Water Will, but also produces that Time Will I use for my Dragon's Lord Breath. So I kind of want to have it at the nice 4 spot. Next, Speaking Stone I do run at 4 of. It has barriers, so it's safe from your opponent's Mosasaur plays or their plays using the new Ruined Earth. So it's going to stick on the board. It produces your green will that you need, but it also allows you to produce the darkness for Ruin Stories. And being able to run Ruin Stories, a card that holds 3 slots in your deck, is ultimately very valuable. Moving on to the Rune deck, the entire reason I'm using Arthur. Maintenance, just because it's so good for early game or mid game, just to be able to generate 4 1/1 counters onto 2 of your machines. For a Vivian, that's tapping down 2 things. For a Lancelot, that means the difference between blowing up a resonator or not. This could also mean the difference between you wiping the board or not. Monsterify is really good early or late game. It's just going to make one of your resonators a 9/9. I used this to end a game by making a Vivian into a 9/9 after I gave her 12 counters. So she swung for 2100 and pretty much won me that game. Petrification I use to hold down the game, so if your opponent swung out massively and you're a little behind, you can use it to stall for a turn, holding them at bay while you just relax and have a little breathing room. Reconnaissance, it lets me do a bunch of 4C and draw a card, lets me set my next few cards up. Mostly the same reason Approaching the Truth is in the deck. It's just going to give me a little more seeing into the future and ability to play around it. Scrap and Build lets you kind of recover if your opponent does an early game field wipe. So if I had like a Vivian out on the field and a Lancelot and they wipe the field and I'd previously sacrificed a Donut Drone, for 1 blue I can Scrap and Build, tribute all 5 of them, and search the top 5 cards of my deck and take a 5 cost machine and put it into the field. Ultimately, this deck's pretty solid, and I really like the way it went. It went and the way it played. So I'd probably give this deck probably a 4 out of 5. There are probably some things I can do to improve it over time, and when I do come out with a version I think is 5 stars, I will post it up. But in a tier list, I'd say this isn't tier 1, but it's probably like a tier 1.5. And it just comes down to your skill level and how well you think you can play the deck to making it better. Any deck can be your tier 1. It all comes down to the player. With just the other members of Vault of Will, we've had several times where they think a deck is unbeatable, and I will just swap decks with them. Just while we're sitting there, grab their deck, put it on my side, grab my deck, put it on their side, and we'll play reversed. And the deck they thought was unbeatable will lose. It's mostly the player, your skill level. And if you know more about how to play your deck and you've been with your deck longer than they have, you can probably pull some tricks out where they weren't expecting. You take two players running the same deck, one of them is going to win for a reason. It's not always luck, especially in a best 2 out of 3. A lot of it comes down to your skill and your knowledge of the deck. If you know every way of playing this deck and every combo it can play, you could probably push this to a tier 1 deck. But thank y'all for watching. I expect a lot more to come over this week. I can probably crank out another like 6 videos tomorrow, between today and tomorrow. Keep channel growth going. Hope to see y'all later in the future. This is Magnus signing out.